I'm Jonas Arca. I'm an instructor with AACC Online, and I'm here with Matt Kuisle today. Matt is also a contributing instructor at AACC Online. He's a professional engineer with an education in background in civil engineering and environmental engineering, right?
That's correct.
And he's the director at Reserves Advisors Southeast. He's an expert on reserves. And that's why I wanted to talk to you today, Matt. Obviously, what happened in Surfside, was a terrible tragedy with the South Champlain Towers, and I don't want to go really down that rabbit hole. It's being talked about enough on the news, and they can cover what happened a lot better than we can. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to talk to you today because we know that, board members are concerned. They're talking to their CAMs, they want to know, what they need to do to avoid something similar. So do you have any initial thoughts,
Yeah, and of course, our hearts and thoughts go out to the families affected by this horrible tragedy. We don't know what happened or what caused it. So you're right; it doesn't do a lot of good to speculate. But of course, to give peace of mind to other boards, when some of the things that they can do to ensure that they've got good structural integrity to their buildings is just listen to your buildings. The buildings are a lot like our bodies, and we're feeling sick. There's ailments, there's signs of stress or fatigue that show up, and too many times people see these things and say, that looks expensive, let's not deal with it. But I think this is just a good point to let the boards take a step back and remember their duties to the community to keep them safe, but also maintain the value of each unit that there is going to be critical to make sure that the building's in good physical shape and also make sure the community's in good financial shape. Most buildings in that area are subject to a 40-year building recertification. In southeast Florida, Miami-Dade and Broward counties require it. Palm Beach suggested it, but and I'm sure we'll see some sweeping legislation that may require that more widely for a lot of buildings. We haven't seen anything yet, but I'm sure that that's probably being considered and will be part of the future legislative action. But at this time, one of the best things the community can do is to just look. It's not. You don't necessarily need to have an expert trained eye, but when you see large cracks in structural concrete, so vertical concrete or horizontal concrete, cracks are what we call spalls, where the concrete breaks off the building or kind of chips off the building, and you might see exposed rust, and that rust is the steel. It's what's giving your building the strength. And when you start to see those things, it's a good time to probably call in an expert and to call in a structural engineer. If you're seeing hairline cracks in concrete, small cracks, quarter inch and less, they're probably not going to create. It's not necessarily a sign that there's significant structural problems until you start to see that steel exposed and cracking. But one of the biggest things that we don't know what caused this tower, this issue with this particular tower. But it is becoming evident that the board was in a hard spot. The board didn't have enough money for repairs that their professionals were telling them to conduct. And I see this time and time again where boards just simply don't have the funds to work with to put back into the building, be it for some structural issue or something, an air conditioning issue or a roof issue, whatever it might be. Boards have had a difficult time when memberships vote to waive or underfund reserves. And Jonas, that's one of the things we try to help communities do, is make sure they don't get into that position or understand the magnitude of some of these problems.
In your opinion, how big of an issue is underfunded reserves? Do you see the majority of communities are underfunding?
The ones, so we work with about 2,500 communities in Florida, and I would say, there's probably about half of those that we work with that are underfunding their reserves currently, and there's another large chunk, so we're working with less than 5% of all the associations in the state. And I assume the ones that aren't even calling us as professionals to get an idea of what their fund needs are likely underfunding as well. So I think that it is a widespread issue. I've read somewhere between 3 and 10 and 7 and 10 associations have reserves that would be considered weak or underfunded. And that's consistent with my experience as well, that it's pretty common. And the reason is, a lot of the reason is because of projects that are not really readily visible, maybe not sexy for the board to do, things like roofs and air conditioning and concrete, which isn't as visible to the owners. And so a lot of times they don't want to set aside the funds for those items because it's out of sight, out of mind.
Sure. When I think about this issue, I think about we have communities that are kind of in different stages. We have these older communities in these older buildings where this issue is more immediate, especially for them. And then I'm sure you work with a lot of the younger communities as well. And this should kind of serve as a wake-up call to them too, because you have to start early, right? With reserves, you don't wait, until things get bad to start funding them.
Ideally, right. The longer you wait to address the problem, the less time you have to do it. It's like not saving for your retirement until you're 59 and a half years old. It obviously is going to be much harder than if you started when you're just starting working and when you're 20s. So yeah, the best, it's never too late. So just like with retirement, again, if you find yourself 40 years in and you haven't had reserves to this point, well, it's never too late to start saving for those next round of projects, but it might be a little bit of a harder, a larger adjustment. We have some makeup to do. The owners that are living there and currently and the owners living in the future are going to have to probably pay more than if the funds had been set aside all along.
And how do they fund these projects if they didn't set aside reserves?
Yeah, so if you didn't set aside reserves, you've got kind of 3 options. Number 1 is a special assessment. So you can special assess all the owners for the project at that time. Most boards have the ability to levy this, thankfully, themselves. Some boards require a membership approval to do that assessment. In a lot of cases I've seen where when that's required, the memberships vote down the special assessment. So that kind of becomes a non-starter for them. The other option that a board has is financing. If a community is in decent financial health, if they have a reasonable number of delinquencies, certain amount of with the owner occupancy, number of factors that banks look at, they can and arguably should at times borrow the money. It's a relatively favorable lending environment right now. So that's kind of option 2 if they don't have reserves. And option 3 is to do nothing and to defer the project and don't do it. And that's it's one thing when that's a lobby renovation or your pool furniture. Obviously, it's another thing when it's a structural component or a safety issue within the building, like balconies or railings or your fire alarm system, your plumbing, your electrical systems, and obviously your structural concrete. Those items do unfortunately get deferred, and many boards do nothing year over year because they don't have the reserves for them. And you're right, this has to be a wake-up call that we cannot let our communities continue to get into that position, because it becomes impossible if that board doesn't have the ability to save the funds, doesn't have the ability to get the loan, doesn't have the ability to special assess. There really isn't any other option, and that's a horrible place to be in.
Absolutely. And I apologize, if anybody's watching this video, they might hear my French bulldog grunting, and he just popped his little head on the screen here. Sorry about that. But if I tried to put him in another room, he would be barking and trying to claw at the door. So just the new reality we're in with the remote working. Well, I really appreciate your time. I didn't want to go too long today. I kind of just wanted to get your thoughts and kind of give some initial facts and just knowledge for the managers that may be watching this. so they can go back to their boards and you know, speak to them intelligently about the issue, and also, you know, persuade them, you know, to take whatever action that they need. Did you have any, you know, kind of final thoughts before I let you go?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I mean, it might come, you know, probably a shameless plug because this is what I do. However, reserve studies are that first line of defense. So reserve study usually involves a trained professional inspecting the building, and they can help identify some of those areas that may start to be problematic. The longer that those issues go untreated, especially when it comes to something like concrete restoration, the more expensive it gets. The costs can really exacerbate. If it's left alone, it gets a lot worse. It's like a cancer in our buildings, and if we don't address it early on, it can really spiral out of control. And so, you know, consult your professionals. You know, managers can often identify these types of things, but you know, if for relatively easy inspection, visual inspection, your reserve study is a good way to get started, identify any potential issues there, and just start to set aside a plan for remediation before that does get too big to handle or require, you know, additional funds that may not have been necessary if it was treated right away.
100%. Well, I appreciate you jumping on this call with me today, Matt. I don't really have anything else to add, but I look forward to hearing from you and talking to you in the future.
Absolutely. I'm sure there'll be some updates, legal updates and things that we'll need to give once the legislature kind of gets a chance to review this and change that. So let us know how we can help, Jonas. Appreciate talking with you, and good to see you again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt.
Take care.
You
Bye.
too.